it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Steve.
Yeah. You've been a little vocal about something that I want to talk to you about. You mentioned you gave a talk at LSI, and it's about, the shifting realities of MedTech investment. FDA approval is not the goalpost anymore. It's just kind of one of the doors you need to open, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And I know you work with a lot of leaders and startups and working with, they're trying to get funding and go through their regulatory process. So there's a lot of learnings that you could pass on. In particular, I'm part of Anchor Balloon, led by Dr. Vishal Gupta on that part of that team at the startup, and we're working on DBV for our 510K pathway. So any learnings from your learnings could be passed on would be real helpful.
Well, lucky for you, you're part of a technology that's well established in the market, right?
Yeah.
So the challenge isn't so much getting approval, because you'll be able to get in as a predicate device. But the challenge with all companies is, what does that path to quality regulatory approval look like? And then for ones that aren't able to jump on such a convenient predicate device, how do you establish society adoption, right, before launch? How do you establish a pathway to reimbursement? And that's really the first question when we get on calls with early stage founders and CEOs and even venture capital and private equity that are looking to invest in this space is, what's the pathway to reimbursement? What does that look like? Are there existing codes that you can jump onto? If not, we know it takes 3 to 7 years, right, to get your own code. So what are you going to do in the meantime with those unlisted codes? And that's the challenge. And so there's a lot of good stories out there, but if you start with the economic story early, because reimbursement timing, often determines not just how you win, but when you win. I think of a recent conference I was at. It was a Mass Medic conference, and we were in a breakout session on wearables. And a company called Noctrix Health was presenting, and they were talking about their restless leg syndrome device and how they paired that strong clinical data with a clear reimbursement path, and they closed that gap between approval and payment, so that really they had the trifecta of society adoption, reimbursement approval, all those things happening all at one time, so that when they were ready to launch, they had already reached that goalpost, as you mentioned. So that's really the missing, I don't want to call it missing thinking, but that's the gap that I see between a lot of companies with a great product with incredible features and benefits, but they really haven't thought about the economic impact.
Yeah. And I was looking into this a little further to prepare, and I saw something that 72% of MedTech CEOs now cite reimbursement as the leading barrier to innovation. So the economics, like you're talking about, the codes.
Yep. I would add to that there's a commercial gap in the boardroom. You have a lot of great operators, a lot of great financial minds, and successful investors that are part of the board, and even advisors that are from industry but maybe haven't built from scratch. And so if you add operators who have built and scaled teams, not just advisors who understand strategy, I think you can go a lot further, a lot quicker. And a leader who's taken a product to real revenue will immediately challenge pricing, hiring, go-to-market decisions. And that ability to scale quickly, Steve, is the difference between the companies that succeed, the ones that have a ton of turnover, and the ones that don't. So that's really an area where I'm seeing the successful early stage companies branch out into, is getting that early stage commercial person on the board to really help drive decisions.
Let's dig a little deeper into that, Ryan, because I know you certainly need, for a startup, someone with commercial experience. In fact, most of the time the CEOs are a commercial person, like Scott Nelson, right? He talked about how many times he's pitched to raise money, but that's not exactly what you're talking about here, right?
No, it's not the pitch, it's the build, right? So the pitch is the sizzle, right, if you will. It's generating the interest. Yeah, it's getting the money to roll in, but then you have to execute. And so you need somebody who's commercially done that, who's built from scratch, who knows that the scars that you get along the way have built you into an indestructible machine for your next company. And there's a lot of those people out there. And What I think is important to point out, Steve, is even people that on paper it looks like the company failed to materialize, right? There's a lot of companies that fizzle out because of funding.
Right.
But their IP then gets acquired by, the Intuitives of the world and the Boston Scientifics and the J&Js, and that IP gets redeployed in another fashion. What they're not looking at is, what did that individual learn that could help me at my company versus maybe somebody who hasn't been through that, right? And they only have rose-colored glasses. Because what happens is you're entering a reimbursement constrained environment, early stage typically. You don't have the resources that a large company has. And so when I talk to people about their career and why they may want to make a bet on an early stage company, it's because you don't want that gap on your resume. You want to be able to say, hey, I've worked at the large companies and I've worked at the small companies. And here's what I've learned from both. And here's how I've married those things together to make my contribution to this new company something that can scale revenue and lead to an acquisition or help them towards an IPO.
Okay, excellent. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
When we spoke earlier last week or so, talking about novel technologies that you bring into the market, you talked about the real importance of these de-risking things like demos. The example of Yanari thrombectomy device, and I think maybe Impella, and when you were at the Boston Scientific, you shared some great examples where you could show radial force of stents, I believe.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that as far as going to market?
Yeah, there's a phrase I like to use, Steve, called simple isn't shallow. And that means if you can demonstrate the simplicity of a device so that the light bulb goes off for the person watching that demo, that's incredible. And something we would do with our stents at Boston Scientific, they weren't laser cut stents, right? They were braided. So they had incredible radial force. And this is back in the day when, the large strategics had tons of R&D dollars. They were creating their own products. They were innovating, iterating. Now they're so big, they have to buy the companies, right, that are doing that. But I remember we had launched a product called WallFlex, and it was an improvement on the wall stent that they had acquired from Schneider years ago. And they grabbed I'll just use my Mentos gums here with a demonstration. They grabbed like a saline bottle from the lab, and they would grab a stent, and we'll just pretend my clock from my computer screen here is a stent.
Okay.
And they placed it on top. Okay. On a laser cut stent, it smushed it flat. Mm-hmm. Okay. But on the radial stent, when they tried to place it, boom, it fell over.
Right.
It wouldn't stand up because the radial force was too great to allow the stent to be smashed by the saline bottle. And it's amazing, that little demonstration, and how the light bulb would go off in the eyes of the interventional endoscopist, and they'd say, I'm putting this stent up into the biliary tree, or maybe it's a pancreatic head mass that's pressing on the bile duct, right, extrinsically, and it's closing it down. And they're saying, well, I just put in a laser cut metal stent. I don't understand why this patient's bilirubin is so high. Why are they jaundiced? Why are they having pain? Right upper quadrant pain. And then they go in and see that stent's clogged. And then they replace it or telescope our stent through it.
Yep.
We realize, okay, now it's open. So that's the difference, is the demonstration. And I can give you one more, Steve.
Yeah.
They had a product called a CRE balloon. I'm sure it's still part of the bag. And it used also radial force versus sort of shearing force. So when I put my shirt on in the morning and I pop my head through my shirt, that's shearing force. Okay. And my neck on my shirt looks okay. No big deal. If I was to use radial force and I was to stretch out the neck on my shirt for 60 seconds, what do you think my neck would look like the rest of the day? It would be a bacon collar, all worn and stretched, right? And so we would show that demonstration. We would grab a t-shirt, and we would stretch out the collar and show them. And that really is a difference. And then, of course, you could have them feel the balloon, the difference. You can measure the PSI. You can do all the technical things. But it's showing somebody, not just telling them, where it really makes a big difference.
Right. Excellent. Let's move on to quality systems, the other part of the triple crown, so to speak.
Of course.
Yeah, we've taken on Anchor Balloon. We've used Green Light Guru to kind of ensure that we have the highest quality standards, and then we have a great regulatory and quality team. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on, is that as far as a validation requirement in the industry, a robust QMS system?
Yeah, I mean, you want diligence that's organized, that's audit ready, that's building buyer confidence ahead of time. So if you're not using a strong electronic QMS system right now, you're increasing risk. You're delaying deals, in my opinion. Yeah. And you see it all the time. People, they try to do it on their own, or they'll hire, a subject matter expert as a part-time consultant. They sometimes call it interim or contract advisor. And you get what you pay for there, right? You get 10 hours of somebody's time a week when this needs to be full-time attention. So if you can get the attention of somebody full-time for the price of using a strong electronic, QMS, what they call EQMS, like a Green Light Guru or others, you're doing yourself a huge favor. And you're also starting to expand your network to other companies that can help you get your product launched successfully. So, if you talk to an EQMS company and you've got some other issues that you're navigating, maybe it's market access, right? They're going to say, hey, here's who you should talk to for market access. Or you don't have money for full-time marketing, but you need to start pre-marketing your product. Well, here's some outsourced marketing companies like BMMG, who we work with. Yeah. Or maybe you want to work with Dragonfly Media, who's going to tell your story to the market, amplify your message to the market. And that's our media company. Whatever that looks like, the more people you connect with, Steve, in this space, people like to help people, right? We want to see everyone succeed. There's enough business to go around. There's a huge enough burden on patients and disease states to where the more companies succeed in this space, the better. So I highly recommend going with an EQMS company, and then they can plug you into a lot of other companies that can help you as well.
Interesting. Yeah, we're all in this together, right? And it's what makes it such a fun industry in so many ways.
Absolutely. So why don't we talk about, how you can survive sort of that valley of death that you and I talked about in scaling of companies, where you win by conserving capital and expanding into new indications early. I know you've seen this in your career on the CDMO side, and how they'll come to the contract manufacturers and say, hey, we've manufactured to this specification for this disease. We may need to manufacture to this specification for this disease state. Do you have any specific examples that you could share with me so that I can educate my clients and founders and CEOs on, hey, this is what you might want to be thinking about for your next iteration or after you get this product and indication approved?
Yeah, so there's a burn rate, right, that everybody goes through. And selecting a CDMO to work with is critical.
Yeah.
Part of that, because like you said, the valley of death of maybe 5-7 years, right, for FDA and Medicare coverage and all that stuff. So I think it comes down to selecting the right partners in a CDMO. There are small, nimble partners that you could work with that maybe have some disadvantages. They might be quick and nimble, but they don't have the ability to scale. You have the large CDMOs that everybody's familiar with. They have tremendous scalability through offshoring as well, Costa Rica, some of the low cost. And then you're and then the downside of the big ones is they sometimes don't want to work with small startups.
Yeah.
Right. They don't. If it's a doctor with an idea on a napkin, good luck getting a large CDMO to even entertain a conversation. Or they might look at it from a pipeline standpoint and take it in, but you don't get a lot of attention. You might have started with one of the lead engineers and you end up with an intern working on the project.
Sure. Well, that's where the big companies can help, Steve, right? So if you're working with a large company, say as a physician or even as a representative of that company, and there's a physician that has an idea, there is a process that you can go through within that large strategic to submit that idea, right? To get it patented with the help of the company. Of course, the company is probably going to want their share of it or first right of refusal on that technology. but it can take a lot of the cost, a lot of the uncertainty out of it, and it can expedite your ability to use their manufacturing capabilities for your product should it get selected. But I agree with you. It's a lot like what we deal with in executive search and on the advisory and media side of our business. We're able to help the early stage companies because we know who to plug them in with on the VC side, private equity side, CDMO side. I mean, how often do I call you and say, Steve, I need somebody in this space that can, create a product for this particular domain. Who would you recommend, right? And you'll rattle off 3 to 5 people just on memory. And if we don't get what we need there, you'll send me a list and say, here's all the interventional cardiology CDMOs. Here's all the robotics. Here's all the minimally invasive stapling companies. And that's huge for us because it saves us so much time doing research. Even with AI today, it's not super accurate and it's not a personal testimony. And until I know somebody that I trust that recommends someone, I won't recommend them to my clients.
Right. Absolutely. That's critical. Just like we said, there's advantages, disadvantages to the small players and the large players. That's why the folks do pretty well.
Yeah.
Because they can scale and they can work with you on those early stage projects. And there's several very highly qualified CDMOs out there. Private equity has kind of shifted things a little bit for the good, and also in some cases, in the long run, some of the industrial companies that get involved in MedTech, they don't understand the market, don't have the partners. Private equity, they might have a portfolio of different MedTech companies. They understand the industry better.
Sure. Yeah. You look at like an Ajax Health, right?
Exactly.
They invest in MedTech. You look at HIG Capital, right? Lots of MedTech companies.
Sandstreet, all these guys.
So Andy, there's a ton of them
Yeah.
out there. And even on the private equity side for CDMOs, you see a lot of that, right?
Yes.
Where they'll make, this contract manufacturer for robotics and capital one of their portfolio companies.
Yeah.
The question is, do they have others in their portfolio so they know how to operate? Because if it's the first one, that could be a challenge, as you know. Listen, I know we're coming up on our time here, but in preparation for this, I started researching accidental med device discoveries. And I didn't realize, even though I worked at cardiovascular systems and at Boston Scientific and other companies, that the angiogram was accidentally discovered. And they were trying to inject contrast into the aorta of a patient and accidentally injected it into the coronary artery and thought, okay, this is bad. This patient might not make it. Of course, the patient did fine. And then they realized, okay, we can image the coronary artery now. And I think of all the inventions out there. And another one I came across on the pharma side was sildenafil, which is Viagra. And it brought it out for blood pressure. Didn't work well for blood pressure. But the nurses, who are always on top of it, noticed that every patient, when they would come in to check them on their blood pressure, was laying on their stomach. And they asked them why. And of course, they found out why, really quick. And then, bam, blockbuster drug. In fact, they even made a movie, Love and Other Drugs, with Jake Gyllenhaal and who's the girl from The Princess Diaries? Anne Hathaway. So if you ever want to see what crazy pharma was like back in the 90s, watch that. But I mean, I researched everything, Steve, from pacemakers and how those were created. They accidentally put the wrong part into a resistor and realized that, oh, here's the rhythm that we need. And it went from this large, obtrusive, low quality of life device that was pacing the heart to an implantable. And a lot of our best things are created that way. When I was early on in endoscopy, I was calling on a ton of gastroenterologists, and Humira was getting really popular at the time. And I remember the Humira rep telling me this was an arthritis drug. And all these people with arthritis that also had Crohn's and colitis started reporting that their Crohn's and colitis got better. And so then they got the expanded indication for that. And it's, one of the largest blockbuster drugs ever. And so you see that a lot in medical device and life sciences and pharma, where once the device gets to the market or an idea gets to the market, the accidental discoveries on how that can be expanded or used in a completely different area of the body. I mean, you look at pulse field ablation. We've had ablation forever, right? And now it's completely reshuffled the deck for EP. You talk about like focused ultrasound. You look at companies like Insight Tech and others completely reshuffling the deck. Cala Health, they've got a wearable for essential tremor, so even less invasive, right? You wear this thing for 45 minutes on your wrist, and you don't have tremors for the next 2 to 4 hours.
Yeah.
So we're at the tip of the iceberg for what these devices can do. I see a future before 2030 where we're talking about Alzheimer's and dementia being a thing of the past. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I think that disease state, in fact, I know it kills more people than breast and prostate cancer combined. And we're right on the precipice of getting rid of those things, or at least, drastically eliminating a lot of the causes.
Yeah.
So you and I can unpack stuff like this all day long.
Yeah, just from more of a, we're talking about my experience in contract manufacturing and polymer processing, and I was doing a podcast recently with folks at Confluent.
Yeah.
They make polyimide tubing.
Mm-hmm.
So polyimide, we talked about the electrophysiology. Polyimide tubing is used in MedTech because it has this material has amazing properties, dielectric strength, like in insulation properties, column strength, scratch resistance. So for stent delivery, for electronics, and the way that material was used going way back was an insulator for magnet wire. And so they were making this magnet wire, and somebody didn't prepare the main wire that the polyimide goes over correctly. So the surface of the wire was oxidized. So the tubing slipped off the mandrel, the wire, very easily. They're like, holy shit, we can take this mandrel. We have the one too. There's probably some other applications without the mandrel or wire in it that could be applicable. And if you know about the Chattanooga, Tennessee area, that's like the land of polyimide. That's where all, because of that invention, and everybody started there, and that's where it's all made now from kind of a mistake that somebody, quote, mistake, and now it's, it's used so heavily in MedTech.
I love those accidental stories. I remember, and this is outside of MedTech, well, maybe MedTech adjacent because it is a healthcare product. I think Johnson & Johnson owns Vaseline, but oil, people working in the oil fields noticed this buildup on the oil shafts, this waxy buildup. And it didn't smell particularly great, but it wasn't harmful. And of course, their hands were chafed and dirty and scraped, and they would rub this residue on their hands and their hands would get better. And somebody saw that was a way to make money, and they decided to clean it up and get it approved for healthcare use. And then that's Vaseline. Yeah. So it comes from a natural resource, right? Petroleum Vaseline. Right. And it's just amazing the uses for things. And it's called off-label use, of course, a lot in medical device. But I remember doctors, creating things with scissors and sutures, and now the stents are they have that built in, right? The built-in hook so that you can reposition the stent or remove it. It's just, or even anchor it with an endoscopic suture or a mechanical clip. So the sky's the limit. The only thing that limits these doctors and these CDMOs is imagination, and then of course the FDA. Of course. But when a patient's on the table, you want a creative doctor who's willing to do whatever it takes to help that patient have the best quality and quantity of life possible. And I think that's why your podcast, Steve, is so important. Why all these educational podcasts are so important, especially in the med tech space. I mean, you've got Device Talks that does an incredible job. We try to pump out some content from the Mullings group. It's wherever you can share what you've learned and then ask people what they've learned and inspire the rest of the med tech community. That's how we build this up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're doing here, both of us.
Right. You got it.
Awesome. Hey, it's been great having you on the show, Ryan. Appreciate it.
Yeah, let's do it again.
All right, absolutely. We'll see you.